What if Thanksgiving the one day meant for warmth and togetherness turned into a cold sentence the moment a son walked through the door and realized they weren't waiting for him? They were using him to clean up the mess. And the cruelest part is they didn't just leave behind an empty house, they left a dying man shivering in the dark, treated like an inconvenience they could simply let fade away. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to him from the heart. The strategic briefing room at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam always smelled the same. Burnt coffee that had been sitting on hot plates too long, industrial floor wax, and the sharp recycled cold of overworked air conditioning. It was a sterile scent, the smell of hierarchy and paperwork of decisions made far from where consequences actually landed. More than 200 officers filled the room, colonels, lieutenant colonels, senior majors arranged in clean rows that mirrored the military's obsession with order. The front section was reserved for VIPs, generals, commanders, people whose presence alone bent conversations around them. I sat in the very back row, seat near the aisle, spine straight, eyes lowered, hands folded loosely in my lap. I'd perfected the art of being unremarkable a long time ago. Not in combat, not in training, at home. If you didn't draw attention, you didn't invite correction. If you didn't speak, no one could twist your words. Do the job, file the report, disappear. On paper, I was Major Ryland Rye Vexley, United States Air Force, mid-30s on the roster, but just over 30 in reality. My visible assignment placed me squarely in operations and coordination, important enough to justify a seat in the room, bland enough to never raise questions. I was the kind of officer people nodded at in hallways and immediately forgot. Down front, under the bright white lights, sat my father, General Stanton Vexley, 3 stars on his shoulders. A man who'd spent decades mastering not war but rooms. He knew how to laugh loud enough to fill silence, how to pause just long enough before speaking so people leaned in. When he shifted in his chair, conversations adjusted around him without conscious thought. I didn't hate him anymore. That stage had burned out years ago. Hate takes energy, and I'd learned to conserve mine. What I felt instead was something quieter and heavier. Every time I was in the same space as him, I felt myself shrink not in rank or competence, but in permission. As if I still needed approval just to exist in his line of sight. The briefing droned on. Slides clicked. Pens scratched paper. Someone whispered a joke near the front and my father laughed, booming practiced. The kind of laugh that reminded everyone who owned the oxygen in the room. Then the pressure changed. It wasn't a sound at first. It was the instinctive tightening in the chest, the way trained bodies register disruption before the mind names it. The double doors at the back of the auditorium flew open, not creaking politely but snapping wide with controlled force. A man stepped through. He wore Navy working digital camo stark against a sea of Air Force blue. His boots hit the carpet with purpose. On his collar, the silver eagle of a full colonel. On his chest, the unmistakable trident. SEAL Colonel Gideon Rusk. He didn't scan the room. He didn't acknowledge rank or protocol. He walked straight down the center aisle like it had been cleared for him in advance. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even my father's laughter cut off as if someone had pulled a cord. Rusk stopped 10 feet from the stage. I need a Tier 1 sniper. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They carried with the weight of urgency and consequence, the kind that only comes from someone who lives in a world where minutes decide who goes home. Before my mind could catch up, my body reacted. I stood. Not because I wanted to be seen. Not because I wanted recognition. But because that sentence, those exact words, weren't part of a briefing. They were a summons. A request phrased in operational language aimed at an asset that officially didn't exist. I knew Rusk wasn't here for my father. He hadn't cut through protocol and walked into a room full of generals to ask permission. He was here to find something buried. A chair scraped faintly behind me as I rose to attention. And then my father turned. He looked at me the way someone looks at a child who has spoken out of turn in public. Amused, annoyed, confident the situation was already under control. He laughed. It echoed across the room. "Sit down," he said, his voice ringing clear enough for every officer to hear. "You are a zero." A ripple followed. Not real laughter, not humor. The kind of noise people make when they're relieved they're not the target. Careers stayed intact when you laughed at the right moments. I sat back down. I didn't argue. I didn't look at him. I didn't explain. Something inside me shifted anyway. Not humiliation. Not anger. A countdown. Because that sentence wasn't new. "You are a zero" was just the polished public version of a message I'd heard my entire life at dinner tables, at garden parties, in every space where my father needed the family to look a certain way. As I lowered myself into the chair, the smell of coffee faded. The hum of the air conditioner blurred. In its place came the scent of polished wood and roasted turkey. And I was 18 again, back in Annapolis. Thanksgiving. The house in Annapolis looked like something out of a brochure, colonial lines, manicured lawn, white trim so clean it felt untouchable. Inside it was a museum dedicated to my father's career. Framed photographs of him shaking hands with senators. Shadow boxes filled with medals arranged at perfect angles. An American flag folded into a crisp triangle on the mantel. I was 18. The dining table stretched long beneath the chandelier, set with the good china, the kind no one dared chip. The television in the living room played a football game loud enough to fill the gaps between sentences. The crowd roared. Plates clinked. My mother moved back and forth from the kitchen with practiced precision, placing dishes as if alignment itself could keep the peace. I'd been holding my news for weeks, waiting for the right moment. I believed naively that Thanksgiving might soften him. A day built around gratitude, family. I cleared my throat. "Dad," I said. He didn't look up right away. He kept cutting his turkey neat and deliberate. "What is it?" I felt my pulse in my ears. "I got the letter. I was accepted." That made him pause. Just slightly. "Accepted where the Air Force program," I said. "The advanced track. Recon and sniper pipeline." I told him about the scores, the evaluations, the benchmarks that eliminated most candidates before they even started. I didn't boast. I just laid out the facts the way the military had taught me to. My mother froze with the gravy boat halfway to the table. Her eyes flicked to his face, hopeful. Waiting. He finally looked at me. Not with pride, with confusion. As if I'd announced plans to run away with the circus. "That's not realistic," he said flatly. "You're better suited for coordination, logistics, safe roles." "It's not safe," I said quietly. "But it's real. And I qualified." He laughed once. Sharp, dismissive. "War isn't a spreadsheet," he said. "You don't have the stomach for it." When I tried to push back, he cut me off with a raised hand. End of discussion. Then he turned to my brother Bo sitting across the table. His voice changed, warmed. "No rush figuring things out," he told him. "You know your limits. I'm proud of that." Bo smiled, unbothered. He'd dropped out of school months earlier and spent most days drifting. That was acceptable. I looked down at my plate. The turkey tasted like nothing. Later that night, after the house went quiet, I lay on the floor of my bedroom and reached under the bed. I pulled out a shoebox I kept hidden behind dust and old memories. Inside were ribbons, target sheets with tight groupings, certificates from summer marksmanship camps I'd attended without telling him. Proof of something I was never allowed to be good at. I'd learned early that talent was only acceptable if it fit the image. Downstairs, my mother scrubbed a roasting pan in the sink, her hands red from hot water. "Why does he do that?" I asked her. She didn't turn around. "He worries." "It feels like erasure," I said. She finally faced me, tired eyes soft with something like apology. "Don't make it harder. It's easier if you let him be who he is." That night I decided to disappear inside my own house. No more sharing, no more hoping. I didn't know then that invisibility, forced at first, would become the foundation of everything that came after. Or that one day a man would walk into a room full of generals and demand a ghost, and that my father for the first time in his life would realize he'd never really seen me at all. I was 21 when the shoulder gave out. It happened during a nighttime land-nav drill at the Western Training Zone, cold air cutting through soaked BDUS, sweat burning into scrapes. I hadn't noticed my rucksack dragging against a rib that would later show up fractured on the X-ray. We were pushing through the final waypoints when my boot caught something slick under the mud. 1 second I was moving. The next I was flat on my side with a crack I felt deep in my chest. They sent me to the base infirmary. A curtain, morphine, and silence. I lay there staring at the speckled ceiling tiles while the morphine dulling my bones couldn't numb the louder sting the voice I could already hear in my head. I didn't call him. It wasn't even a debate. I knew how the conversation would go. No concern, no warmth. Just a lecture dressed as a verdict. So I didn't call. But my mother did. I knew she would. And that's what made it worse, because a part of me, no matter how hardened I thought I was, still waited for something soft to come through the line. The phone buzzed on the tray beside my bed. One text. No greeting. No punctuation. Taichua. Boji. Venha. Song Cho Jang Hoang. I stared at it for a full minute. That was it. No, are you okay? No, we're coming. Just a command. As if pain was proof he had been right all along. And then the kicker, a suggestion that I should come back, settle down, marry someone suitable, maybe help out in Annapolis or take some safe Pentagon-adjacent job where his friends could monitor me, an ornamental life. Predictable, safe, leashed. I turned off the phone. And in the fluorescent quiet of that medical bay, I asked myself something that shifted everything. If he was never going to see me, never going to accept me, then what the hell was I living for? It hit me like clean air after a long dive I'd spent my whole life moving around his shadow, waiting for his gaze to soften, for his voice to change. But the truth was brutal and liberating. He didn't want a son. He wanted a mirror, and I refused to be that. The moment I could stand again, I submitted my transfer packet. The hardest route, the quietest route. A program where visibility got you killed, where your last name meant nothing unless someone was carving it on a plaque. I signed up for the one path he couldn't contaminate because it didn't exist on his radar. The track where my very existence had to vanish in order to succeed. I wasn't doing it to prove him wrong anymore. I was doing it to cut the cord, to turn every echo of his voice into static. The first thing I did when I returned to training was change how I walked, how I breathed, how I stood in a crowd. I started erasing myself in ways that felt deliberate, almost sacred. Ghost wasn't my name yet, but the blueprint had been drawn, and the number 13, that would come later. Earned, not chosen. The moment I left that infirmary, I was no longer his son. I was no longer waiting to be seen. I had started becoming someone no one could track, not even him, and that made all the difference. Mississippi doesn't play fair. Camp Shelby deep in the pines smells like mildew and rot. The air clings to your skin like guilt. It seeps through your boots, your collar, your pores. The bugs don't care who your father is, and neither does the mud. It just swallows you whole. That was the start of sniper school. I was 22. My body still ached in places from the fall, but I carried it like a secret, tight-lipped, no limp. Because weakness wasn't a wound here. It was a signal flare. And in this course, signal flares get you cut. The intake was brutal forced marches, water obstacles, elevation drills, simulated stress, sleep deprivation, hunger noise. They stripped us down until all that remained was instinct and will. Then came the harder part, stillness. The art of becoming nobody. Stalking drills lasted hours. Crawl inch, breathe shallow. Learn how a leaf bends when it's stepped on wrong. Learn what scent carries on wet air. Learn the exact pressure your elbow puts into soft dirt before it becomes a trace. The instructors didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Every failed movement ended with a spotter's glare and a hand signal to get out. The hiding tests were worse. Lie still under brush for 8 hours. No scratching, no blinking off rhythm. Swallow too loudly, and you're found. Get bitten, stung, cramped, no matter. Don't move. One guy quit mid-shiver. Another started crying into his sleeve and disappeared before morning. But I stayed. Because this wasn't about passing. It was about shedding the last of what made me traceable. Report drills followed. You observe. You record. No embellishments, no instincts. Just what you see, how far, how long, and in what direction. Emotions are a liability here. Then the shooting began. Long range, variable wind. Angle calculations, thermals, elevation. Breathing technique, heart rate, humidity. Each round was math. Each miss was a death. You don't get second chances at 1,000 meters. My first few rounds were tight. Not perfect, but close. And then the whispers started. Vexley isn't his dad, some general guess that explains how he got in. The name was supposed to mean nothing here, but it followed me like a stain. Some guys started watching me differently. I caught instructors hovering longer at my firing station, double-checking my logs. I was sent on randomized drills, more often pushed into back-to-back assessments until my vision went gray around the edges. I didn't complain, because part of me needed it. I wanted them to see I wasn't built from privilege. I was forged from rejection. But then something strange happened. After one stock report, I noticed a symbol on my file. A strange mark, non-standard. It wasn't from our instructors. Someone else had eyes on me. Someone higher. Someone outside the school structure. That changed everything. I wasn't just being evaluated, I was being hunted, or recruited. I didn't know which was more dangerous. Then during a critical week, a call came through. My mother. Again. The message was polite, soft. Your father wants you home for the ceremony. Important guests. I stared at the notification. If I called back, I'd break the rhythm I'd spent weeks mastering. If I gave in even just to explain, I'd lose the one thing I was finally starting to feel: autonomy. So I didn't answer. First time in my life. And it nearly cost me everything. That same night during a live concealment drill, my body revolted. Hours without motion. Bladder screaming. Muscles locking. I had to make a choice between personal dignity and mission fidelity. I chose the latter. And when the drill ended and I peeled myself out of the earth smelling like filth and shame, I expected the self-disgust to come roaring in. But it didn't. Something else rose up instead. Power. The power of not needing approval. Of doing what needed to be done regardless of how it looked. Of knowing I could endure things most people never even imagined and not fold. My father once told me shame was what kept a man decent. But here it was, the ability to live beyond shame, that kept me alive. I passed that final test. They kept me. And now someone somewhere knew my name for a reason that had nothing to do with bloodlines. I was becoming a ghost. And the question I couldn't shake was, who saw that coming? And what did they want with me next? Afghanistan doesn't care who you are. Not your name. Not your bloodline. Not your rank. It just strips you down to muscle memory and instinct, and if you're lucky, a steady finger when everything goes loud. Kunar River Valley. High ridgelines like jagged teeth. Dust so fine it lived in your lungs for weeks. Nights so cold they cracked your lips open before dawn. That's where I earned my first stripe that didn't go on any ribbon rack. My assignment was Overwatch. Long-range support for a joint task force moving into a compound suspected of holding a high-value hostage. Intelligence was vague weather worse. We inserted under moonlight with enough gear to sink a truck. They gave me elevation, a good angle, and a spotter who didn't talk unless he had to. We crawled for 6 hours to get to our perch. Wind was chopping hard through the valley, throwing every calculation into chaos. The team moved below us, 8 silhouettes flowing between rocks, cover to cover. Then everything snapped. A sharp whistle over comms. We're pinned. RPG, 11 o'clock, 10 meters from compound wall. I didn't wait. My spotter called distance 927 meters. I already had eyes on. Narrow figure. Shouldered launcher. The math kicked in, fast wind at 22 knots crosswise. Drop 6 feet at this range. Exhale on the half beat. Trigger squeeze, not pull. Let it break itself. The shot cracked through the valley like a signature. Target folded. RPG dropped harmlessly. Radio went silent for a second. Then target down. Moving. No one said thank you. No one turned around. That's how it's supposed to be. Do the job. Vanish. That night as we exfiltrated through freezing fog, I didn't say a word. Neither did my spotter. But when we reached the rendezvous and I stepped away to reload gear, I heard it. He's like a damn ghost. The name stuck. Not because I wanted it, but because no one could remember what else to call me. Ghost wasn't a nickname. It was a placeholder for someone you never saw coming but who left a mark that couldn't be undone. Tours blurred after that. The missions got harder. Deadlier. We stopped keeping count of how many nights we didn't sleep. How many times the terrain almost killed us before the enemy even had the chance. I got good at vanishing. At turning up only when necessary. At collecting intel, coordinating support fire, watching people walk away alive because I pulled the trigger when no one else could. Some of those missions never existed on paper. Others lived in black folders with no names. I never asked questions. I didn't debrief more than was required. I learned to wear silence like armor. And in that silence, someone noticed. His name was Gideon Rusk. He wasn't my father. Thank God. Rusk was attached to one of the Allied commands. Rough edge to his voice, dry humor, the kind of man who didn't waste oxygen asking about your resume. First time we met, he looked me up and down, then just asked, "You get the job done?" I nodded. He grinned. Then that's all I need to know. That was the first time in my life a man in authority didn't try to shrink me to fit his image. The contrast hit me hardest when I came home on leave. Annapolis, my parents' house, big garden party full of people who smiled without showing teeth, contractors, generals, senators, aides. I was barely through the back gate when someone asked, "And where's our soldier boy been hiding these days?" I opened my mouth, just enough to say something real. Not classified, but real. Before I could speak, my father's voice cut clean across the patio. "Oh, he's been in Europe, studying, finding himself, you know." A polite chuckle. Glasses clinked. I just stood there, half a step behind him, close enough to be part of the family photo, but far enough to feel like a prop. He looked right past me as he said it. Not even a glance. And I realized something gut level, something that changed the whole shape of our war. My father wasn't just ashamed of me. He was afraid of what I'd become. Because what I'd become didn't fit his script. The war I fought didn't have medals he could pin on my chest at fundraisers. The life I lived didn't come with talking points. If he acknowledged who I really was, he'd have to surrender control of the story. And he would never do that. I didn't call him out, didn't ruin the party, didn't challenge the lie. Because in that moment I understood something deeper than anger. Silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. So when I returned to my unit, I filed one request reassignment to a more permanent classified division. No more temporary deployments, no more visibility. Total erasure from conventional command structures. I knew the risks, I accepted the terms, because if my father needed to control the narrative, then I would become someone no narrative could touch. Someone who lived off the record, a ghost. And if I was going to become that, I'd have to pick a number. But not just any number. One that would make sure he never wrote over me again. 7 days before the Hawaii briefing, I sat at a table in D.C. that didn't belong to any war room. It was a seafood place in the wharf, the Salt Line. Off-duty, no uniforms. Just a handful of us who'd bled enough to earn the right to sit in silence and not explain the bruises. I was laughing for real for the first time in weeks. Something about the oysters being overpriced and the beer tasting like melted metals. Then Master Sergeant Tessa Rourke, sharp-eyed 2 decades in, looked at me and said quietly, "You know he's not blind, right?" I paused mid-sip. She didn't wait. "He knows exactly who you're becoming. That's what scares him. Not that you're reckless, that you're respected." I didn't answer. She leaned in. People like him don't fear failure. They fear irrelevance. And you're not asking for permission anymore. An hour later, my phone buzzed. Text from my father. "Be home by 1900. Need patio cleaned and grill ready. VIP guests. Wear something clean. Nothing military." I stared at it. "No, please. No curiosity about where I'd been. Just an order like I was on staff. And the final line, that was the kicker. Nothing military. Translation: don't remind people you're a soldier. Don't make them uncomfortable. Don't overshadow me. I drove to his house in silence. When I arrived, the prep was already in motion. Landscapers, caterers, music cues. The entire backyard turned into a staging ground for political theater. My father wasn't hosting a BBQ. He was orchestrating a power display. I wasn't a guest. I was a stagehand. Somewhere between wiping down stainless steel and organizing wine bottles, I found a memo tucked under a stack of folders. Unmarked, misplaced. But the name on the scheduling note caught my eye. Mine. The meeting it referenced a personnel review I never attended because I'd never been told. And the signature A 3-star who owed my father a favor. My chest went cold. He hadn't just dismissed me. He'd sabotaged my upward track, kept me off leadership rotations, boxed me into non-transferable positions, all under the banner of what's best. He wanted me nearby, visible, contained. That night at the Joint Base Andrews Gala, everything came to a head. I wore my dress uniform, regulations sharp, no frills, just the truth. My father frowned when he saw me, not angry, calculating. I watched it happen. The moment he realized I wasn't decoration anymore. Then it got worse. A junior officer, former teammate, approached me, saluted, called me sir. Respect clean and public. My father swooped in fast. "Ah, this is my son," he said loud enough to drown the salute. "He's helping us out tonight." Helping. As if I was bartending. 10 minutes later, he handed me a drink order and asked me to deliver it. To a man who'd once flown out a wounded Marine under sniper fire. I took the tray, walked it across the room, set it down without flinching. Because I wasn't playing his game anymore. I was studying the room. Who watched? Who looked away? Who saw the humiliation and pretended it wasn't there? Outside near the vehicles, he caught my arm. Fingers like a clamp. "You think I can't shut you down?" he hissed. "I built your career. I can unbuild it." I looked down at the red mark rising on my skin, and I smiled. Not out of defiance, but clarity. Because that's when I understood this wasn't about love. This was about control. And control ends the second you stop letting someone define you. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling of my hotel room until sunrise. Then I stood in front of the mirror. Not to adjust anything. Not to prepare. Just to look. To witness the version of myself who would walk into that Hawaii briefing and not flinch. Who would no longer sit down when my father smiled. Who would wait calm, precise for the moment someone in that room asked a single question. Call sign. And I would answer. With the name I earned. Not the one I was given. The briefing room at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam felt exactly the same as it always did. Burnt coffee, floor wax, cold air that never quite reached the corners. Rows of officers sitting in careful symmetry uniforms pressed notebooks open more out of habit than necessity. The lights were too bright, the kind that flattened faces and erased nuance. I took my seat in the back row again. Same posture, same discipline, same practiced absence. On every visible system, I was still just Major Ryland Vexley, an operations officer with a clean record and an unremarkable paper trail. Nothing that justified attention. Nothing that explained why I'd been summoned to a room this full. My father sat up front exactly where he always sat. General Stanton Vexley didn't need to speak to dominate a space. His presence alone rearranged it. People angled their shoulders toward him without thinking. Laughter clustered around his chair. He looked comfortable, in control, certain of the story this room was about to tell. I wasn't afraid. That surprised me. What I felt instead was a narrow calm, the kind that comes right before contact. I knew something was coming. I also knew my father would try to pull me down the way he always had, publicly, casually, with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. The double doors slammed open behind us. Not ceremoniously, not politely. A man in navy digital camo walked straight down the center aisle like the room belonged to him. He didn't acknowledge rank protocol or the 100 pairs of eyes tracking his movement. Colonel Gideon Rusk. He stopped 10 feet from the stage. "I need a Tier 1 sniper." The sentence cut through the room. Conversations died. Pens froze mid-scratch. Even my father's smile flickered. I stood up. Not to be brave. Not to be defiant. Because that sentence wasn't rhetoric. It was a live request. A call phrased in the language of urgency aimed at someone who knew exactly what it meant. Before I could say a word, my father turned in his seat. He laughed. Loud, confident. The kind of laugh meant to tell everyone else there was nothing to see. "Sit down," he said, voice carrying across the room. "You are a 0. A ripple of nervous laughter followed. The safe kind. The kind that protected careers. I didn't move. My father's expression shifted just slightly. He said my name again, slower this time, layering authority into every syllable. Then he escalated, his voice sharpening as he referenced discipline chain of command consequences. He wasn't just correcting me anymore. He was asserting ownership. That was when Rusk stepped forward. He placed himself between my father and me, his back to a 3-star general, his attention entirely on me. It was a small movement, but the effect was immediate. The room went quiet in a way I'd never heard before. Rusk didn't argue. He didn't explain. He asked one question. Call sign I answered without hesitation. Ghost 13. The temperature in the room changed. Rusk's eyes narrowed not with suspicion, but with focus. He followed up with rapid-fire checks, sector identifiers, mission parameters, operational references that meant nothing to anyone outside a very narrow circle. I answered every one. Clean, precise, no extra words. I confirmed access levels that weren't supposed to be discussed in rooms like this. Enough to make it unmistakably clear that I did not exist inside the system my father controlled. I watched my father's face drain of color. His smile vanished. His hands clenched against the armrests. He looked around the room, searching for someone to back him up, to laugh it off, to reassert the script. No one moved. Rusk addressed me directly, issuing orders with the ease of a man who knew the clock was already running. Wheels up. Minutes, not hours. I didn't look at my father. I looked at Rusk and acknowledged. As I stepped into the aisle, the people who had laughed earlier shifted out of my way without being told. My father rose, blocking my path in a last reflex of control. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "I forbid it. I'm your father." I stopped long enough to meet his eyes. "You don't have clearance to discuss this, General," I said evenly. Not loud. Not angry. Just true. Then I walked past him. The doors opened. Sunlight flooded in, harsh and blinding. Behind me was the world he curated. Ahead of me was a mission that didn't care who raised me. Hours later, the hum of engines replaced the echo of that room. The operations center was all green light and muted voices. Screens flickered with live feeds. The smell of diesel and overheated electronics filled the air. Rusk's team was pinned down. Terrain unfavorable. Enemy dug in. I took position, ran the calculations, synced breathing to the pulse in my ear. My secure phone vibrated. Missed call. My father. Then another. I didn't need to answer to know why he was calling. It wasn't concern. It was panic. The kind that comes when control slips through your fingers. I looked at the screens again. One showed a name on my phone. The other showed men who needed me. I powered the phone off. The shot traveled clean and true. The window opened. The team moved. I cycled the bolt. A single casing hit the floor with a sharp metallic sound. No celebration, no words. Just the job done. And for the first time in my life, the silence afterward belonged to me. War doesn't end cleanly. Neither do reputations. While my days blurred into missions, briefings, and after-action reports measured in minutes and margins, another conflict unfolded back home. It moved slower, quieter, but it cut just as deep. The story from the Hawaii briefing spread the way rumors always do through gyms, hallways, officers' clubs. Not exaggerated, not dramatic, just repeated. He didn't know. That was the part that stuck. A 3-star general known for controlling everything in his orbit had stood in a room full of peers and realized he didn't know who his own son was. That contradiction did more damage than any accusation ever could. When my father tried to regain control, he went to the tools that had always worked before rank and family. He called Colonel Adrian Cross, the officer responsible for visible personnel records, demanded full access, unredacted files, everything. Cross didn't raise his voice. He reminded my father that the line was recorded. He asked calmly whether my father was ordering him to violate federal law. The silence that followed lasted several seconds too long. That was new. Later at the officers' club, my father walked in like he always had, uniform, immaculate medals catching the light. No one stood. No one rushed over. People nodded politely and looked away. Chairs around the usual tables stayed empty. It wasn't punishment. It was worse. Indifference. When I heard about it, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt something close to closure. Months later, we met in San Diego. Neutral ground. A small cafe in Little Italy. Cold air espresso machines humming a corner table where I could see the door. He arrived in civilian clothes, older, smaller somehow. He talked around the truth, about safety, about intentions. I didn't argue. I laid out terms. No public diminishment, no rewriting my life for appearances, no claiming my work as part of his legacy. I didn't ask for pride, I asked for respect. He didn't apologize the way movies say people should, but he called me Major. That was enough. Years later, at a promotion ceremony in Colorado Springs, I chose who pinned my rank. Master Sergeant Tessa Rourke. My father watched from the audience, not directing, just witnessing. Afterward, a young officer approached me, voice low, eyes tired. He talked about family pressure, about being forced into roles that didn't fit. I listened. Then I told him the only truth I knew for certain. Family can give you a name. They don't get to write your life. Ghost 13 was who I had to become to survive. Now I live as the man I chose to be. And that's enough. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is quietly draw a line and hold it. Not in anger, not for revenge, but simply because we've finally remembered our worth. This story isn't about defeating someone. It's about what happens when the weight of old roles finally lifts and a person starts breathing in their own name again. When a son stops trying to win a father's approval and instead chooses peace. A real, steady kind. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. We all carry histories, some loud, some buried. But what we do next, what we choose to pass on or leave behind, that's where the real story begins. Maybe that's what today reminded us, that even silence can be a boundary. And sometimes it's the kindest one we've got. If this story touched something in you, or if you've ever lived through a version of it yourself, feel free to leave a few words below. We read every comment with care. And if you'd like to be part of a space that holds stories like this quietly, respectfully, consider subscribing. It means a lot. We'll see you next time. We'll see you. Until then, take care of your peace and of each other.